Started in Sunday school, started a brand new series of lessons out of the book of Colossians. I imagine that this is going to be a little bit shorter of a series. Some of you know I talk about this a little bit. When I first started preaching and when I went to school and things, they talk about what they do is they talk about the working within the attention span of people. When you work with children, you always want to make lessons like 5 minutes long, and you teach 4 or 5 minutes, and then you get them to do something else, and then you might give them another 3 or 4 minutes, and then you do something else, and you do that because a child's attention span is short, and then as they get a little bit older, you can expand the lesson a little bit and a bit longer lessons before you break up and do some other kind of activity because their attention spans grow, and then when you get to adults, a person ought to have an attention span that can last 40 minutes. It used to be preachers 200 years ago it was very uncommon for a preacher to preach less than 2 hours, and it was just very uncommon, but because people had much larger attention spans than they do today. We've got television, in a television show, if you ever watch it, a television show, one single television show has about 3 different plots going on within that show. There's 3 or 4 different storylines going on within that show. And they do that to keep your attention because they know if they just have one story plot, you'll lose, your attention span won't do that. So they have to keep flipping back and forth to different story plots. And they do that. And even then, our attention spans are so bad now, we still have to click and see what's on the other stations. 150 stations. We've got to try to keep up with all 150 of them in an hour's time. And it's because we've got now as adults, we're getting shorter and shorter attention spans because of so much entertainment in our lives. And so what I do as a preacher, I have a couple of different tools that I use to help work with attention spans as I'm bringing a message or as I'm doing a series. And one of those tools I use is I have more than one point. And so I give you point 1, and I give you that point, and supposedly, anyway, they say this. People who teach about teaching tell you this. You say point 1, and people pick up. And you start teaching point 1, and people start to fall asleep more and more and more and more until you say point 2, and people go, oh. And then you teach 4, and then people start to fall asleep a little more. But point 3, and it's, they wake up again. And you can do that maybe 5 times before a person doesn't care whether you got another point or not. And so they just fall asleep on you. That's what they say. And they also teach, when I was in school, they'd say a series should never last more than 13 weeks long. You should always have a series and so if you look at a lot of Christian books, you go to the Christian bookstore and you find a book on the book of Jeremiah, or you try to find something to teach you on the book of Matthew, you'll find out they're almost always 13 to 15 chapters long. It's because they know they can't keep any longer than that. You won't. And the problem with that is what happens is because our attention span doesn't tolerate us really studying things in depth, everything you can find to study is shallow. It never gives any depth, never gives any meat, because the fact of the matter is most of us don't have the attention span to tolerate that meat and so forth. And for years and years, I preached that I would write up every year. I would write up a preaching plan, and I would have break it up into quarters, 4 quarters of the year, and I would have each quarter I would have one series for Sunday school, one series for morning service, one series for evening service, one series for Wednesday night service. And what I would try to do is break it up. If I was preaching through a book of the Bible in Sunday school, then Sunday night I would preach a topical series, and then on Wednesday night it might be, if Wednesday night was a book of the Bible, then Sunday morning would be topical or something like that, because trying to break it up and keep it. And a few years ago, and I don't know if this is good, bad, or whatever, I just decided I needed to get past the surface of things. I need to get a little bit deeper, which requires that I take more time in studies, and so that's why I preach series now that last 2 and 3 years long. And we're in our it's the 3rd year now in the book of Isaiah, and we'll finish it this year, I'm pretty sure. But 2012, 2013, 2000. Actually, that's not even true. I started in 2011. We will finish in 2014, the book of Isaiah, because there's just no way to get in the depth of the book if you just do it in a 13-week period of time. However, now, this is the book of Colossians. It is only 4 chapters long. I can't imagine it taking too awful long. I don't think it'll take all year to get through the book of Colossians. However, I will tell you, I am not going to, I'm going to do my best not to skip anything. I'm going to do my best to give some depth to this book and for us, so that we can learn some things that maybe we've always looked at and we see them and we kind of walk past them. A few weeks ago, Brother Mark Rogers was preaching, and he mentioned that, he said, have you ever had a question in the Bible, and so you didn't know some Bible verse, you have a question about it, so then you start looking in the books, you're trying to find an answer to your question, you find out that all of the books skip that verse. And he said it's because they don't have an answer for your question either, and so they don't know what that verse means, and so they just skip it. I'm going to try not to do that, and just to skip something because, we only have so much time to teach anyway, and this is the first that's hard to teach, and so just skip past it. I'm going to try not to do that as we go through here. But I can't imagine it's going to be a terribly long series of lessons through here, so I don't think it'll take that long to do this. This morning I want to begin with just some introductory stuff, book of Colossians, and stuff that have to do with the town and the character of the book. And you see the title for the lesson this morning, Christians Paul Never Knew. This is an interesting passage of Scripture, Colossians, because it is written by the Apostle Paul to a church he never met. There is no record that he ever went to the city of Colossae, where this church is. No Bible record of it, no historical record of it in any other place. And in fact, the evidence inside Colossians makes it sound like he doesn't know these people personally, with the exception of a few people that are in the church. He doesn't know the members of this church personally. He is writing a letter. He is writing and giving instruction to a group of people he has never met. And so we're going to look at that a little bit this morning, that idea. And in fact, that probably will be something that I'll keep going back to as we go through this series, because this is an intriguing idea. A lot of times we get such a closed-minded attitude about spiritual things. Here we are, we're Bible Baptist Church, and we're on Canyon Road in Puyallup, and and this is it, and there ain't no more. And we as a independent Baptist church, we're missions minded, so we know about world missions and so forth. But I wonder sometimes if we really have the concern and care for people who aren't here, or people that will never meet this side of heaven, if we have the care that the Apostle Paul shows. So I'm going to show you some things about that. Now, begin first of all here, something that's interesting, I think, is the connection that there is between this book of Colossians and the two other of Paul's books written to the church at Ephesus, the Ephesians, and also the little book called Philemon. 2 other books in the Bible. What just happened there?
We had to write really fast.
Well, you're just going to have to write faster.
Read fast.
Huh. Well, this may not work for us today then, so that one's going to stay. All right, so I'll give them to you here in just a minute. I'll give them to you. I'm going to get there in just a second, so I'm going to give them. So to show you the connection there is between the book of Ephesians, the book of Colossians, and the book of Philemon. And then there's a person who's going to be mentioned in the book of Colossians I want to also mention here too. Philemon, the book of Philemon, is written to a particular man. His name is Philemon. Philemon is a person who lives in the city of Colossae and appears to be a close friend of the Apostle Paul. When Paul writes the book of Philemon, we're not studying that today, so don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but he's writing, when he writes the book of Philemon, the Apostle Paul has given his little letter, we call it a book, but it's a little letter, to Philemon, and he's given it to a guy by the name of Onesimus to take to Philemon. Onesimus is a slave that belongs to Philemon and has escaped. He's left Colossae and he has escaped his master, and he's made it up to Rome, and when he gets to Rome, he runs into the Apostle Paul, who is a prisoner in Rome. The Apostle Paul leads Onesimus to the Lord, spends some time, and there obviously it's not just like, he leads him to the Lord and lets him go, because Onesimus is able to, the Apostle Paul gives testimony that Onesimus has been a minister to him, and that Onesimus has been a blessing to him. And so after a period of time of discipleship and training and whatever else has happened, Paul sends Onesimus back to Philemon. And he sends him with this letter, and the letter says, listen, whatever damage has happened because Onesimus ran away, lay that to my charge. And he implies in the book of Philemon, you and I are very, very close friends, and you can trust me. We have a relationship that is tight enough, that's close enough. You know that I'm good for it. Whatever Onesimus has done that has been a damage because of running away, whatever damage that has caused, whatever loss has happened to you because he's left, I want you to forgive him of his error of running away. I want you to forgive him of that, and I want you to lay all of the charge to my account. Blame it on me, is what he says. So there's a very close relationship between Philemon and the Apostle Paul, which exists, is pretty obvious. And then there is the relationship between, and then there's the city of Ephesus. And if you read the book of Ephesians and the book of Colossians, you'll see that they're almost parallel. In a lot of ways, there are a lot of parallels between the two books. Colossians is a lot shorter book than Ephesians is. It's a much shorter read, and but there are a lot of similarities between the two books, and I think there's some reasons for that. Ephesus is they're both the city of Ephesus and the city of Colossae are both in a region that was at that time called Asia Minor. It is now in what's called Turkey, and the city of Ephesus does not. The city of Colosse does not exist anymore. It was destroyed. Shortly after the Apostle Paul wrote this letter, the city was completely annihilated, destroyed. It was built up again. And I think it was destroyed by an earthquake, if I remember right. Pretty sure it was an earthquake. It was destroyed. They rebuilt it, and it destroyed again. And that time, when it came back, the third time, it came back with a different name. And now, if you look on a map, I think it's called Krone. I don't know how to pronounce it. Krone, I think it is. And same area, same local area, the city of Ephesus, but Colossae was a small kind of country town. It's a small place, way out in the sticks. It's out by itself, out in the sticks. And kind of by itself. And Ephesus is on the coast. It is or very close to the coast anyway. It's about 10 or 15, 30 miles away from the coast. It is a metropolis. It is the economic center of what was Asia Minor in those days. It was the economic center, and Colossae is about 100 miles away, 105 miles away, and although this is a long distance, because the Roman roads and so forth, how the Romans had built up roads and transportation at the time, Colossae, the people of Colossae, if they had any business to conduct, any major business to conduct, they would have done it in the city of Ephesus. And we're going to mention this a little bit. I'll mention it here again in just a few minutes. But at one point, the Apostle Paul, he's writing in the book of 1 Corinthians in chapter 15, and he says he wants to stay in the city of Ephesus for a while. And he says this. He says, "A great door and effectual is opened unto me." And the city of Ephesus, he sees great potential there in the city of Ephesus. I think one of the reasons why he sees so much potential is because not only because of the people that he can reach that are in the city of Ephesus itself, but because people from that region come to Ephesus to do business and then go back home and do business at home. And so what appears to have happened, here's the way it looks, it appears that the Apostle Paul met Philemon when Philemon came to Ephesus to do some business. It appears that he met him, that he led him to the Lord there in Ephesus, and then Philemon goes back home. He also meets another person, at least this is the what it looks like happened. He also meets another guy by the name of Epaphras, and you find him called two different names in the Bible, Epaphras and Epaphroditus. And it appears he is a man from the city of Colossae, and it looks like what happens is it looks like it happens this way, that he leads Epaphras to the Lord. Epaphras surrenders to preach the gospel. He is trained by the Apostle Paul. He goes back to the city of Colossae to plant a church, and they plant that church in the house of Philemon. We do know there is a church that meets in the home of Philemon, and it appears that Epaphras is the pastor of that church that meets in the home of Philemon. So there's this connection between the city of Ephesus and the city of Colossae, and the pastor Epaphras, and then Philemon. Paul's stay in Ephesus is the longest one of any of his missionary in his missionary work. By the way, did I answer all those questions on that for that one that I just gave you? This slide. It should have been Philemon, Ephesus, Colossae, and Epaphras, somewhere like that. Should have been. Those might not have been the exact, but those were the things that I talked about. Philemon did something, Ephesus happened, Colossae, and then Epaphras. Did you get all of those? All right, good. All right.
Is Ephesus?
What's that?
The last blank is Ephesus.
The last one says, a man appears to be the pastor of the church in Colossae was Epaphras.
Okay.
Did that get the right?
Almost certainly Paul met both Philemon and Epaphras while he was in Ephesus.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, that's it. Okay, so Paul's stay in Ephesus, it's, as I said, it's the longest in all of his missionary work. I kind of took some time to look at all of Paul's missionary journey this week as I was preparing for this, and spent some time watching his travels around in all of his journeys. There's about 5 of them. I always think of Paul having 4 missionary journeys. Some Bible students say there's a 5th one, and that being his journey to Rome, but he's a prisoner, so I don't think of that as quite the same myself. But so I looked at all of these different journeys and so forth, and looked at how long he stayed in places. He stayed in the city of Corinth for 18 months, a year and a half. But other than that, and that which is a pretty significant length of time for the Apostle Paul, he usually didn't stay that long. But the place he stayed the longest was the city of Ephesus. He stays there for at least 3 years in that city. He first visited the city of Ephesus at the end of his first missionary journey. So makes these trips. He and Barnabas go out, and they travel around Cyprus and then Asia Minor, and they travel around, come back down to Antioch, and then go to Jerusalem for a period of time as well. That's their first missionary journey, and then they come home and they report to Antioch, and there's some business they've got to do in Jerusalem. They do that business, and then after a period of time, the Apostle Paul gets ready to go out on another missionary journey. There is a disagreement between he and Barnabas, and Paul split up. Barnabas goes north into Asia Minor, Paul goes north into Asia Minor. Barnabas goes back to the islands where they had started in the first trip. And the first trip, missionary journey, the Apostle Paul kind of ends by going through the city of Ephesus, and he sees what's going on in Ephesus. Well, when he leaves the second trip, he goes to Ephesus. That's kind of his purpose. That's kind of his plan. He wants to go and spend time in Ephesus because there he can see something, some potential there, and he stays a full 3 years. When he gets there, and he felt a connection and saw the importance of a ministry there, or that he felt a connection in Ephesus to Ephesus, and the importance of the ministry is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, not chapter 15. 1 Corinthians 16 verses 8 and 9. He says, "But I will tarry at Ephesus until Pentecost." And then he says, "For a great door and effectual is opened unto me, and there are many adversaries." I want to just kind of spend a couple of minutes with that. He says, here's where I want to stay. Here is what I see in Ephesus. A great door and effectual is opened unto me, and there are many adversaries. He doesn't seem to mind the adversaries. I think that's interesting. The fact that there are adversaries in no way influences his perception of the potential. The fact that it's going to be difficult does not impact the idea that he felt like there was value in Ephesus. Isn't it true that you and I so very often we make decisions based on the easiest road? Very often we do that. Well, God must be in this because an open door we think of an open door, it is all of our finances are paid. Everyone is in agreement of us doing this thing. It's just everything is working out right. And so that must mean that we've got an open door. The Apostle Paul says there's an open door, and one of the reasons I know I've got an open door is look at the enemies. Look at how many obstacles are in the way of this. It must be of God. You know that idea, sometimes when you try the door handle, and if it's locked, try another door handle until you find the one that opens. It looks to me like what the Apostle Paul said, I kicked this door in. I could just see that this was of God, so I just bursted open the door and got into this thing and got going. And so he's sees a great opportunity there. Now, he's on his final missionary journey. We go on in his story a little bit farther, and he goes to his final missionary journey, and he's on his way, and it's not here in Corinth, it's not in the passage I'm reading yet. I'm going to get to it here in a second. But so now we're going to move in. We've got him. First missionary journey, he's introduced to Ephesus. Second missionary journey, he stays there and does a ministry in Ephesus. Final missionary journey, he's on his way back down to the city of Jerusalem. He's been collecting an offering, and he wants to give to the poor saints that are in Jerusalem. The city is in dire straits. The believers in Jerusalem are hurting, they're suffering, and so he's been traveling around as he's been planting churches and preaching the gospel. He's also been collecting this offering that he mentions in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, chapter 16, taking up this offering, and now he's got this offering laid up, and he's ready to go. He's on his way back to Jerusalem, and he knows the Spirit of God is telling him through prophets and other ways, the Spirit of God is telling him that when he gets to the city of Jerusalem, bonds and afflictions abide him. He knows that when he goes there, there's going to be serious trouble, that he will be imprisoned at the very least, and he says, I'm willing to die for what I think is the right thing to do. Again, he believes the door at this point is in Jerusalem, and even if it means dying, he's going to go through that door. He believes that's God's will. People are saying, don't do that, Paul. Don't do this thing. It's not right. You go there, they're going to capture you. You go there, people are going to be against you. And all kinds of problems are going to happen. And he says, what mean you to break my heart? I'm going to do what God's called me to do. Why would you want to stop me from doing what God is leading me to do? And if it means bonds and imprisonment, if it means death, I'm going to do what God has called me to do. And so he's on his way there. He knows that bonds and imprisonment and maybe death awaits him in his future. And so he's on his way down there. There's an urgency in his trip. He wants to get to Jerusalem. He wants to get this offering taken care of. And because there is such an urgency in the trip, on his way back to Jerusalem, he chooses not to stop in the city of Ephesus. He considers it, but he chooses not to stop in the city of Ephesus. It's going to take longer than he wants. It's going to be out of his way. He chooses not to do that. And instead, he stops in the city of Miletus, which is a coastal town about 30 miles away from Ephesus. It's a coastal town. He stops in the city of Miletus, and he calls for the pastors of the church of Ephesus to come and meet him there in the city of Miletus. And that's in Acts chapter 20, verses 16 through 20. I want to read that to you. For Paul had determined to sail by Ephesus because he would not spend the time in Asia, for he hasted, if it were possible for him, to be at Jerusalem the day of Pentecost. And from Miletus he sent to Ephesus and called the elders of the church. And when they were come to him, he said unto them, You know from the first day that I came unto Asia, after what manner I have been with you at all seasons, serving the Lord with all humility of mind, with many tears and temptations, and which befell me by the lying in wait of the Jews, and how I kept back nothing that was profitable unto you, but have showed you and have taught you publicly. So he's called for these elders, these pastors from the church in Ephesus. They have met with them, and he's rehearsing to them, his experience with them. And he goes on, skip down, Acts chapter 20, verses 36, 37, 38. And when he had thus spoken, he kneeled down and prayed with them all. And they all wept sore and fell on Paul's neck and kissed him, sorrowing most of all for the words which he spake, that they should see his face no more. And they accompanied him into the ship. So notice the emotion that's in all of this. He didn't stay in Ephesus for a lifetime, only stayed for 3 years, but these people loved him and he loved them. So all of that's Ephesus, but Colosse is only 100 miles away, and it's the economic center. It's where all the people would have gone. Here's the almost certainly that you're talking about in my notes. Almost certainly Paul met both Philemon and Epaphras while they're in Ephesus. It is very likely, if you think about these believers, this tender moment of the Apostle Paul and these pastors and elders kneeling down and praying and weeping with one another, and knowing that they're never going to see each other again, very likely Philemon and Epaphras are there. talks about the elders of the church in Ephesus, and there is that in no way means that these couldn't also include those people that the Apostle Paul met and were called to preach and went out and pastor churches that were in the area of Asia Minor, that they could have been there as well. So he led these two, Epaphras and Philemon, to the Lord, most likely. Philemon's lent his house for church services, and Epaphras pastored that church. And all of this to say that Paul has never been to the city of Colossae at all. He's never been there. He only knows a handful of the believers. He's only met a handful of them. And we know that he only met a handful of them because of a couple of pieces of evidence that we find in the book of Colossians. Look at Colossians chapter 1 and verse 4. And again, I'm not giving you the whole, I won't read the whole context here. But in verse 4 he says, "Since we heard of your faith," that's an interesting phrase. "Since we heard of your faith," if he had led them to the Lord, it would have been more than just heard of their faith. Very likely that either Epaphras or Philemon or both of them have told about these people becoming believers. "We heard of your faith in Christ Jesus and of the love which you have to all the saints." So if we've heard of your faith, we've not seen it personally, we've never experienced it personally, but we have heard of your faith. And then in Colossians chapter 2 and verse 1, "For I would that you knew what great conflict I have for you and for them at Laodicea, and for as many as have not seen my face in the flesh." All right, for those of you, we've not looked each other in the eyes. We've not seen one another before. So, book of Colossians, it's written to a church that Paul did not plant, and with the exception of just maybe 3 families, he had never met any of these people that he's writing to in the book of Colossians. Not met any of them. But notice a couple of things here. Even though he had never met them, he still claimed an authority to teach and preach that to them. Colossians chapter 1, verses 28-29, "Whom we preach, warning every man and teaching every man in all wisdom, that we may present every man perfect in Christ Jesus, whereunto I also labor, striving according to his working, which worketh in me mightily." So even though he hadn't met him, he still claims an authority to teach and to preach to them and to teach them. He's preaching and teaching through writing, of obviously not personally, but he is teaching. His authority, the Apostle Paul's authority, comes to him as an apostle, and it extends beyond those he personally won to Christ and to those churches that he had personally planted. He is unique. The apostles are unique in that way. The Bible says that they are the foundation of the church, and they have unique ministries. His ministry is unique in that he was, again, because of this apostleship, his ministry it takes on the vision or the view of the model for all sorts of ministries. Everyone in the ministry uses the Apostle Paul for their model. Pastors look to the Apostle Paul and say, here's how you pastor. We learn how to pastor from the Apostle Paul. Missionaries, they learn how to be missionaries from the Apostle Paul. Evangelists, they learn how to be evangelists from the Apostle Paul. Larry Clayton will be here in March. Brother Clayton's a good friend of mine. Brother Clayton's written a lot of material on how to be an evangelist, and he gets it all from the book of Acts and from the Apostle Paul. And he says, Paul, he is obviously an evangelist. An evangelist should do what the Apostle Paul does. But you talk to any missionary worth his salt, and every missionary will say, well, I know how to be a missionary because I read the book of Acts, and I know what the Apostle Paul did. But I, as a pastor, I look through and I read the books of 1st and 2nd Timothy, and I read, his letter to Philemon, and I read these things, and I find how to be a pastor from the Apostle Paul as well. We all use him as a model. Even associate pastors can look to the Apostle Paul because he had a team of men who worked with him, and we can find the model for being a second man or having support ministries from those who were in the Apostle Paul's teams. And listen, there's one place where I think that a modern pastor has a kind of a similar authority to that the Apostle Paul had, and that is in the area of someone that we've trained, someone that a pastor has trained for the ministry. Once in a while, a preacher, one of those preachers that I have trained over the years, and worked in several. We had a Bible Institute in Astoria, and I worked at Pacific Coast Baptist Bible College in Heartland, and then we have Sound Baptist Bible College here at our church. And every once in a while, one of those students from one of those sources in my background, they will contact me for some counsel and some help. And once in a while, they will call on me to come and help them correct a problem in their ministry. And, correct a situation in the church. They'll ask me if I will come and talk to the members of the church, or usually what they want me to do is to preach. a message to their church. And, as someone who trained them, they see me as an authority, and they extend to me that authority into their church. And I think that's what was happening in the book of Colossians. There is something called the Colossian heresy that's going on in the city of Colossus. Epaphras comes to meet with the Apostle Paul to ask questions and get some help about this heresy that is going on. And the Apostle Paul writes this letter in response to what looks like Epaphras' request for help. That's what looks like it's happening here. So he claims an authority to preach to them. He also thanks God for the news of their faith. Even though he wasn't the one who led them to the Lord, he is still thankful that they're saved. Glad to see what God is doing in their lives, and thankful for what God is doing in their church. We ought to learn how to be thankful for people, for what God is doing in places other than our church too, around the world somewhere. God is doing something. I wonder if you can thank God for, I've got to look at my notes here, so thank God for someone who gets saved in Spokane, or someone who gets saved in Pasco, or someone who gets saved in Seattle. Be thankful for what God is doing in one of those places. Paul, here's the question. I don't know why this slide is not working right. I don't know what's going on there. Here's the answer for this. Paul was genuinely glad. That's what you want to put in your blank. Genuinely glad to hear that people were being saved, and that he would never see, that he wouldn't even see face to face on this planet. I wonder if you can do the same. Thankful for people who are getting saved that you'll never meet on this side of heaven. Third thing here, Paul still prayed for them without ceasing. And again, I don't know what's happening, why that's not showing up there, so I'll just do my best. Oh, well, I know why it's happening, because there is nothing under point number 3 here. It's just your answers are right there. He still prayed for them without ceasing. Now, if you're like me, this is interesting, because he's never met them in the face, but he can still pray for them without ceasing. If you're like me, I pray more fervently for people I know. I can tell you right now, my dad doesn't get off my mind. Dad's just had his second amputation, 1st of December. Went and visited him this week. Got a message from my mom. It actually came last night. I read it this morning, though, that he's got another infection. They're putting him on antibiotics again. And Dad never leaves my mind right now. It's not hard for me to say, Dad, I'm praying for you without ceasing, because I'm thinking about him all the time. I pray for my boys without ceasing, the things that they're facing in their lives. I pray for people that matter to me. It's not hard for me to remember to pray for people that matter. When I was in Bible college, I was taught this. When someone comes up, someone you've never met, you're at a football game, and someone finds out you're a preacher, if they teach in the school. You gone to a high school football game, and they come up and say, I hear you're a pastor, will you pray for me? Here's what they said, taught us to do in college, say, right then pray, because you'll forget later. Well, you know why you'd forget? Because you don't really know them anyway. And whatever's going on in their life doesn't really matter a lot to you. And you want to pray for them because that's your job. You're a pastor. You want to pray for them. It's what you're supposed to do, pray for them. But pray for them quick before you forget, because, they're not the kind of people that are going to stay on your mind all the time. Here is a whole church that Paul has never met face to face. And he says, I pray for you without ceasing. It puts a lot more impact in that phrase, praying without ceasing. He's praying for people he's never met, and yet he's praying for them without ceasing. Get into the last one here. He's never met these people. The last one. If I don't know, it just went away. I tried something. Well, no, I'll just leave that alone. Paul, he prayed for him. He did not know these people personally, but number 4, he was still concerned for them to continue in the faith. He still wanted to see him continue on in the faith. I'll go just to that last screen and leave it up there. Whatever the last screen says is where I want to be. All right? So we're going to discover this. I mentioned this a second ago, the Colossians heresy. The Apostle Paul, the city of Colossae, it's a small town. It's in the backwoods of Asia Minor. Paul's never been there. But he did know that an error was being taught in the city of Colossae. And he wanted to see them get that error corrected. He wanted to see them get it right. And I think he's got some reasons for that. Even though it's a small church and a small, out-of-the-way place, error has a way of spreading. Not only does he want to see these people right with God, but he wants to stop the error. I want to see if I can use an application. I'm going to be done in just a second here. I want to see if I can use an application. A lot of times I think you and I think we can get away with, it's okay for us to do sinful things because we really don't matter anyway. I think a lot of times people do that. They have this little inferiority complex. Who am I? I'm not going to matter. I don't matter to God. My life doesn't matter. I'm a nobody, and because I'm a nobody, God really won't care if I commit. God only cares about the preachers who pastor 1,000, and God only cares about the Christians who are really being used in their church, and God only cares for this person, that person. But the fact of the matter is, every one of us, when we give in to sin, influence someone else to sin. Sin is contagious. And one of the reasons why I'm concerned when a person starts to slip away is because I care for that person, but I also care for the domino effect that's going to happen when that person slips away. Whenever I worry about somebody or I'm concerned or I approach someone and say, listen, this isn't right and you ought to correct this thing in your life, and they get mad. Who are you to tell me? Well, and it doesn't matter what I do. It's my life and it's or whatever we're going to say about those kind of things. But the fact is, it's not just your life. Your life is going to affect your children, your family. It's going to affect who you work with.